The Empire stretched across 17 star systems, their crystalline ships cutting through the void like living diamonds. For 3,000 years, they had been the undisputed masters of this sector of the galaxy. Their technology was ancient when Earth was still cooling, their wisdom carved into monuments that predated human civilization by. They were perfection incarnate, beings of pure thought housed in bodies of living crystal that could endure the vacuum of space itself. Admiral stood on the bridge of the flagship Eternal Radiance, his faceted form catching the light of distant stars. The holographic display before him showed the latest intelligence reports from the frontier worlds. A new species had emerged from a small yellow star system, calling themselves humans. They had achieved faster-than-light travel barely 50 years ago, yet already they were establishing colonies, building trade routes, and making contact with other species. "Primitives," muttered his subordinate commander. "Carbon-based, short-lived, emotional creatures. They burn out like candles in the cosmic wind. Why do we even monitor them?" His crystalline eyes shifted to examine the data more carefully. These humans were indeed young, but there was something in their expansion pattern that intrigued him. They didn't conquer worlds. They made friends with whoever lived there first. When they encountered the peaceful, instead of demanding tribute or submission, they had offered medical aid and technological exchange. When they found the war-torn Epsilon sector, they had brokered peace between three warring species. "Perhaps," said slowly, "but observe their diplomatic achievements. In 50 years, they have created more stable alliances than the hegemony managed in 5 centuries." The bridge fell silent. The hegemony had been the greatest rival, a coalition of militant species that had challenged their dominance until they had crushed them utterly. It had taken 200 years of war to break the hegemony's back. His form flickered with disbelief. "You cannot be serious, Admiral. These humans are insects. One squadron of our ships could sterilize their entire." Didn't respond immediately. Instead, he pulled up a recording from the human colony of New Geneva. The settlement had been attacked by raiders, vicious pirates who emerged from the spaces between stars to prey on vulnerable worlds. The human colony had been small, barely 10,000 souls, with minimal defenses. But when the raiders struck, something extraordinary happened. They had mobilized their merchant fleet to evacuate civilians. The Defense Corps had dispatched 3 destroyers despite being officially neutral. Even the enigmatic Veil Collective had emerged from their hidden stations to provide electronic warfare support. All of this for a species they had known for less than a generation. "Watch this," commanded, highlighting a section of the battle recording. The human governor, a woman named Sarah, stood in the colony's communication center as explosions rocked the building around her. Raiders were breaching the outer defenses, and evacuation ships were still loading refugees. She could have fled, should have fled. Instead, she stayed at her post, coordinating the defense and ensuring every civilian made it to safety. When a raider beam finally punched through the center's shielding, didn't cry out or curse her fate. She simply smiled at the camera and said, "Tell my children I kept my promise to protect others first." The recording ended. Observed the subtle changes in his crew's crystalline forms as they processed what they had witnessed. "The raiders were driven off," he continued. "Not by human weapons, but by the combined fleet of 6 different species, all of whom responded to humanity's call for aid. 6 species, Commander, who had never fought together before, who had been suspicious of each other for generations. Yet they came running when humans asked for help." His form had dimmed, a sign of deep contemplation among the. "I don't understand. What makes these humans worthy of such loyalty? They have no great technology to offer, no ancient wisdom to share. Their lives are brief flickers compared to ours." Moved to the viewport, gazing out at the stars. In the distance, a human cargo vessel was docking with Station Theta 7, probably delivering medical supplies or food shipments. Such mundane cooperation, yet it represented something they had never achieved despite all their power. "That, Commander, is precisely what we need to understand." 3 months later, found himself in an unprecedented situation. He was sitting across a table from a human diplomat in the neutral zone of Sanctuary Station. The woman was young by standards, perhaps 30 Earth years, with dark skin and bright eyes that held no fear despite being in the presence of a being who could crack her skull with a thought. "Admiral," Ambassador Maria Santos said, her voice warm despite the formal setting. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. I know this is unusual." Unusual was an understatement. In 3,000 years, they had never engaged in direct diplomacy with a species less than 500 years old. They were simply too primitive, too short-lived, too emotional to be worth the effort. Yet here he was, drawn by a curiosity he couldn't quite name. Your species fascinates us, Ambassador Santos. We have observed your rapid expansion and the alliances you have formed. We wish to understand. Santos smiled and found himself analyzing the expression. It wasn't the calculating smile of a politician or the fearful grimace of someone intimidated by superior power. It was genuine, warm, the expression of someone genuinely pleased to meet a new person. What would you like to know? Your allies, said directly. Even the Vale Collective. Some of these species were hostile to each other before your arrival. How did you accomplish what the hegemony could not with 1,000 years of conquest? Santos leaned back in her chair, her expression becoming thoughtful. We didn't conquer anyone, Admiral. We just listened. Listened? Yes, when we met they were struggling with a genetic plague that was killing their young. Instead of seeing an opportunity to exploit their weakness, we offered to help. Our medical researchers worked alongside theirs for months, sharing everything we knew about genetic therapy. We didn't ask for anything in return. His crystalline form flickered with confusion. Nothing. No tribute, no territorial concessions, no trade advantages. Nothing, Santos confirmed. When they recovered and wanted to thank us, we suggested they might help the next species that needed aid. And they did. When the colonies were hit by those asteroid impacts, they were the first to respond with relief supplies. The Admiral processed this information. It went against everything he understood about galactic politics. Species acted in their own interests. They formed alliances for mutual benefit or protection against common threats. They didn't risk their resources for strangers out of gratitude to a third party. And the Vale Collective? He pressed. The Vale were notoriously xenophobic, hiding in their pocket dimensions and emerging only when directly threatened. Santos' smile grew wider. That's my favorite story. We encountered one of their scouts near the Rigel system. The ship was damaged, pilot badly injured. Our captain could have ignored it, passed by, avoided getting involved with such a mysterious species. Instead, she rescued the pilot and spent 3 weeks nursing him back to health. The Vale pilot revealed nothing of his species' technology or locations, I assume. Not a thing, and we never asked. When he was healthy enough to travel, we gave him supplies and sent him home. No questions, no demands, no attempt to follow him. Was quiet for a long moment, and 6 months later they emerged from hiding to defend your colony. They said they had a debt to pay, but I think it was more than that. I think they were curious about a species that would help without expecting anything in return. The Admiral stood and moved to the station's viewport. Outside, ships from a dozen different species moved in peaceful commerce. Human vessels worked alongside others, their crews mixed, their purposes shared. It was a sight that would have been impossible a century ago. You believe kindness is a form of strength, he said finally. I believe kindness creates strength, Santos corrected. Not for us, but for everyone. When we help others succeed, we all succeed. When we build others up, we build ourselves up too. Turn to face her, and when others betray that trust, when they take advantage of your kindness. Santos' expression grew serious. It happens. We've been burned before, but we keep trying because the alternative is to become isolated, suspicious, alone. We'd rather risk being hurt than guarantee we'll never have friends. For the first time in his long life, Admiral found himself questioning the fundamental assumptions of civilization. They were strong, ancient, wise, perfect in their crystalline forms, yet they ruled through fear and maintained order through superior force. They had no allies, only subjects and enemies. These humans were weak, young, flawed, fragile. Yet they had built something the mighty never had, a growing network of species who would fight and die for each other, not out of fear or obligation, but out of genuine affection. As he prepared to leave the station, Santos offered him a gift, a small wooden carving made by children who had survived the plague thanks to human help. It depicted a human and a child playing together under twin suns. What am I supposed to do with this? Asked, his crystalline fingers closing carefully around the fragile artifact. Remember that kindness creates its own monuments, Santos said. Empires rise and fall, Admiral, but friendship endures. Back aboard the Eternal Radiance, placed the carving in his private chamber, and stared at it for hours. The empire was eternal, unchanging, perfect. But as he looked at the simple wooden figures, he began to wonder if perhaps perfection wasn't the highest goal a civilization could achieve. Perhaps, he thought, being remembered with love was better than being feared across the galaxy. The first seeds of change had been planted in the crystalline heart of the empire. The emergency session of the High Council convened in the Crystal Sanctum, a vast chamber carved from a single massive gemstone that had taken their ancestors 5 centuries to perfect. The 12 council elders materialized in their alcoves, their ancient forms blazing with internal light as they connected to the collective consciousness that had guided their empire for. Elder Prime's voice resonated through the crystal walls like a funeral bell. Admiral stands accused of ideological contamination and consorting with primitive species. Present your evidence, Elder Tan. Elder Tan's form pulsed with angry red light as she accessed the surveillance records. The Admiral has conducted 17 unauthorized meetings with human representatives over the past year. He has allowed human vessels safe passage through our territory. Most disturbing of all, he has questioned the fundamental principles of superiority. Holographic displays showed recent activities, diplomatic exchanges, cultural observations, and most damning of all, recordings of him defending human actions to his own officers. In one particularly inflammatory clip, he was heard saying, "Perhaps we have confused being feared with being respected." The contamination spreads, Tan continued. 7 of his senior officers now echo his questions about our policies. The crews under his command have begun requesting permission to study human social structures. This weakness threatens the very foundation of our empire. Stood in the center of the chamber, his crystalline form steady despite the weight of accusation surrounding him. He had expected this day would come. His growing fascination with humanity had not gone unnoticed, nor had his increasingly vocal doubts about methods. "Elder Prime," he said, his voice calm and clear, "I stand ready to answer these charges." "Speak then," commanded. "Explain why you have abandoned 3,000 years of proven superiority for the philosophies of mayflies." Access the chamber's display systems, projecting images from across the galaxy. Honored elders, observe the current state of our empire versus the human sphere of influence. The first image showed the frontier. Dozens of systems held in rigid order, their populations efficiently managed, their resources flowing toward the core worlds. It was a picture of perfect control, mathematically optimized for maximum efficiency. The second image showed human space, a chaotic web of trade routes, mixed colonies, and shared facilities. Dozens of species worked together in apparent disorder, their activities seemingly random and unplanned. "Chaos," Elder observed, "primitive disorder that will collapse under its own inefficiency." "Will it?" Challenged, shifting the display to show productivity indices. In the past 5 years, human-influenced space has seen a 47% increase in technological innovation, a 63% increase in trade volume, and an 89% decrease in armed conflicts between member species. The council chamber fell silent. These numbers contradicted everything they understood about how civilizations functioned. "Our own territories," continued, "have seen a 2% decrease in innovation, a 12% decline in efficiency, and a steady increase in rebellions and resistance movements. The very populations we protect through our superior guidance are becoming increasingly hostile to our presence." Elder Tan's form blazed with fury. "You compare our eternal stability to their temporary chaos. Their alliances will crumble when faced with real adversity." "Will they?" Accessed another file. 3 months ago, the Confederacy launched their largest raid in a century against the human colony of Haven's Rest. 12,000 raiders, equipped with stolen hegemony warships, attacked a world defended by fewer than 50 human vessels. The recording began to play. Haven's Rest was indeed small, a peaceful agricultural world that exported food to dozens of systems. When the fleet emerged from hyperspace, the human defenders seemed laughably outnumbered. Then something extraordinary happened. Within hours, ships began arriving from across the sector. Hospital ships, destroyers, Veil collective stealth fighters, even the proud draconian clans sent their elite warriors. Species that had never fought together coordinated their efforts as if they had drilled together for years. But it wasn't just the military response that impressed. It was the logistics. Refugee ships arrived before they were called. Medical facilities were established before the first casualty was reported. The humans had created a support network so robust that an attack on one world triggered automatic responses from dozens of others. "Watch this moment," said, highlighting a specific section of the recording. Captain James of the human destroyer Indomitable was coordinating the defense from his bridge. His ship was, and outnumbered, facing 3 cruisers alone while covering the evacuation of a farming community. Any rational commander would have retreated. Instead, opened a channel to all Allied vessels. "This is Captain to all units. I'm about to do something stupid, and I need you to trust me." Without explanation, he ordered his ship to ram the lead cruiser. It was a suicide attack that should have resulted in the destruction of both vessels. But at the last moment, a Veil collective ship materialized beside the Indomitable, its exotic shielding extending to protect the human vessel during the collision. The cruiser was destroyed, and ship survived. "The Veil pilot had no orders to risk his life for a human ship," observed. "He made that choice in a split second, trusting that his plan would work despite not knowing what it was." The battle concluded with a complete defeat. Not a single civilian was harmed, and the raiders were driven back to their hiding places in the void. But more importantly, the victory had been achieved through spontaneous cooperation between species that barely knew each other. Elder's ancient form flickered as he processed the implications. "You suggest that their chaos is actually a form of order we do not understand." "I suggest that their way of building relationships creates strength we cannot match through force alone," replied. "When our subjects rebel, we crush them and rule through fear. When human allies face problems, the entire network mobilizes to help solve them." "But their individuals are so weak," Elder protested. "They live such brief lives, barely a century before they burn out. How can such temporary beings build lasting institutions?" Had been expecting this question. He projected a new image, the human memorial on Haven's Rest, erected after the raid. It wasn't a monument to military victory or technological superiority. Instead, it was a simple garden where representatives of every species that had defended the world had planted something from there. "Captain died in that battle," said quietly. "His ramming attack succeeded, but the impact killed him. Do you know what his last words were?" The council waited. "He said, 'Tell my daughter I kept the promise. Tell her the garden will grow.'" Accessed personal records showing his history. The man had been a farmer before becoming a soldier, passionate about growing things, about nurturing life. His daughter was studying agriculture on Earth, planning to follow in his footsteps. His promise to her had been to protect the worlds where food grew, where life flourished. "The humans don't build monuments to themselves," continued. "They build monuments to their ideals, and those ideals inspire others to carry them forward after the individuals are gone." He showed them more examples. Human scientists who had died researching cures for alien diseases, human engineers who had sacrificed their lives ensuring safe passage for refugee fleets, human diplomats who had walked into certain death to prevent wars. In every case, others had taken up their work, carried their missions forward, built upon their foundations. "We are eternal," he said. "We preserve ourselves across, maintain our knowledge, continue our existence. But perhaps there is a different kind of immortality. Perhaps being remembered with love by those whose lives you improved lasts longer than any individual consciousness." The council chamber was silent for a long time. Finally, Elder Prime spoke. "What do you propose, Admiral?" "I propose we learn from them," said. "Not to abandon our strength, but to discover what we might accomplish if we combined our ancient wisdom with their gift for building friendships." "Impossible," Elder Tan declared. We are perfection incarnate. We cannot lower ourselves to the level of these emotional primitives." "Can we not?" challenged. "When was the last time another species voluntarily joined our empire? When was the last time our subjects spoke of us with affection rather than fear? When was the last time we created something beautiful rather than simply efficient?" He projected one final image, the wooden carving Ambassador Santos had given him, now displayed in his quarters. Beside it were similar gifts from other species he had met, a crystal that sang in stellar wind, and biolite that pulsed with the rhythm of a healthy heartbeat, a veil shadow weaving that showed different patterns depending on the viewer's emotional state. "These are not strategic assets," he said. They have no military value, no economic benefit. They are simply expressions of friendship, tokens of affection from beings who chose to share something beautiful with me because they enjoyed my company. Elder's form had grown brighter during the presentation. I confess, Admiral, that I find myself curious about these humans. Your evidence suggests they have achieved something remarkable. Curiosity is contamination, Elder Tan warned. Next, you will suggest we should adopt their weaknesses as well as study their methods. Their weaknesses are also their strengths, replied. They feel pain when others suffer, which motivates them to help. They form emotional attachments that make them willing to sacrifice for each other. They hope for better futures even when current circumstances are difficult. He paused, his crystalline form shifting to a softer configuration. Perhaps, honored elders, it is time for the Empire to learn what it means to have friends rather than subjects. The vote, when it came, was closer than anyone had expected. 7 elders voted to maintain traditional policies. 5 voted to authorize cultural exchange programs with humanity. It was not the sweeping change I'd hoped for, but it was a beginning. As the council dismissed and the elders returned to their eternal meditations, found himself standing alone in the crystal sanctum. Through the transparent walls, he could see the lights of Prime stretching to the horizon. Perfect, orderly, beautiful, and utterly lifeless. For the first time in his long existence, Admiral felt lonely. But he also felt something else, something No had experienced in Hope for Change. The crisis began with a whisper in the void between stars. Deep space monitoring stations detected it first, a gravitational anomaly moving through the galaxy's outer rim, consuming everything in its path, not destroying, not conquering, simply erasing. Stars winked out of existence. Planets vanished without trace. Entire solar systems disappeared as if they had never been. The Devourers had returned. In the emergency session aboard the flagship Eternal Unity, Admiral studied the horrifying data streams. The ancient enemy that had driven the first galactic civilizations to extinction 1,000,000 years ago was awakening from whatever cosmic hibernation had held them dormant. The readings showed a hunger so vast at comprehension, a presence that treated matter and energy as mere food to be consumed. How long? He asked his science officer. At current progression rate, they will reach the inhabited systems in 18 standard months, Commander replied, her crystalline form dim with fear. First contact will be with human colony Verd. Closed his eyes, processing the implications. In 18 months, billions would begin dying. Worse, if the ancient records were correct, this was only the beginning. The Devourers would not stop until they had consumed every star in the galaxy. The communication board chimed. Incoming priority transmission from Ambassador Santos. Admiral, her image appeared, but she looked older than when they had first met 3 years ago. The weight of constant diplomacy had aged her, but her eyes still held that familiar warmth. I assume you've seen the deep space readings. We have. Ambassador, your people need to evacuate immediately. Verd cannot be defended against this threat. Santos shook her head. We're not running, Admiral, we're calling for help. Within hours, the response began. The call had gone out through humanity's network of alliances, and species across the galaxy were answering. Medical ships prepared for massive casualty operations. Engineers began designing evacuation platforms. Even the mysterious Veil Collective emerged from their hidden dimensions to offer their reality-shifting technology. But as reviewed the gathering forces, a cold certainty settled in his consciousness. It wouldn't be enough. Even combined, the younger species lacked the technology and experience to face an enemy that had devoured entire galactic civilizations. That's when the second communication arrived, this one from Elder Prime himself. Admiral, the High Council has reached a decision. In light of the existential threat to all galactic life, we are authorizing full military deployment in support of the human alliance. Sform blazed with surprise. Elder Prime, the Council voted against closer cooperation with humanity just last year. The Council voted against cultural contamination, corrected. We did not vote against survival. The Devourers represent an extinction-level threat that transcends our philosophical differences with younger species. And after the threat is ended. There was a long pause before replied. We will address that question if we survive to ask it. The gathering at Sanctuary Station 3 weeks later was unprecedented in galactic history. Representatives from 47 different species crowded the massive conference halls, their various environmental needs creating a chaotic patchwork of atmospheric zones and gravitational fields. At the center of it all sat Ambassador Santos, now bearing the title of Coordinator of Allied Defense. "Friends," she began, and noted that she used that word without irony even when addressing beings who had been enemies weeks before. "We face an enemy that cannot be negotiated with, reasoned with, or understood. The Devourers exist to consume. Our only choice is to stand together or die separately." The Draconian War Prime slammed his scaled fist on the table. "My clans have warrior codes stretching back 10,000 years. We do not flee from battle, but this enemy cannot be fought with honor. How does one battle the void itself?" "By being more than the sum of our parts," Santos replied. "Each of our species has developed different technologies, different strengths. Alone, none of us can match the Devourers. Together, we might find a way." Admiral activated the holographic display, showing the tactical situation. The Devourer fleet, if it could be called that, appeared as a spreading darkness punctuated by reality distortions. Traditional weapons had no effect. Ships that approached too closely simply ceased to exist. "The ancient records indicate that previous civilizations failed because they fought as separate entities," he explained. "Each species tried to defend their own territory with their own methods. They were defeated in detail, consumed one by one." "So what do you suggest?" asked the speaker, her melodious voice carrying harmonics of fear. "Integration," Santos said simply. "Not just of our fleets, but of our knowledge, our technologies, our very ways of thinking about reality." The room erupted in protests. They objected to sharing their gravity manipulation technology. The Veil Collective insisted their dimensional sciences were too dangerous to teach others. The delegation reminded everyone that their crystal technology had taken to perfect. Santos stood, raising her hand for silence. When the room quieted, she spoke with quiet intensity. "My great-grandmother lived through the collapse of the Earth Federation. She used to tell me stories about how the old nation-states refused to cooperate even as climate change devastated their world. They were so concerned about protecting their advantages that they lost everything." She gestured to the display showing the advancing Devourers. "This is our climate change. This is our extinction event. We can guard our secrets and die with our pride intact, or we can share everything and maybe, just maybe, find a way to survive." The Veil Collective representative, a being of shifting shadows called Whisper of Stars, spoke first. "The humans offer a dangerous proposition. To share our deepest knowledge risks our very identity." "Yes," Santos agreed. "It does, but the alternative is the end of all identity forever." Found himself standing, his crystalline form catching the light as he addressed the assembly. 3 years ago, I would have dismissed this proposal as primitive thinking. The Empire has survived for 3 by maintaining our superiority through isolation." He paused, accessing memories of his conversations with Santos, the gifts in his quarters, the growing network of species who trusted each other enough to fight together. "But I have learned something from humanity that my people forgot long ago. True strength comes not from standing above others, but from standing beside them." The debate continued for days, but gradually, reluctantly, the alliance began to form. The High Council transmitted the complete archives of their crystal technology. The Veil Collective shared the mathematics of dimensional folding. The Draconians offered their genetic enhancement techniques. Species after species opened their most guarded secrets to their former enemies. The humans, as usual, gave freely of everything they had learned. But more importantly, they served as translators and coordinators, helping disparate technologies work together in ways no single species had imagined. The first prototype vessel launched 6 months before the Devourers reached inhabited space. The Unity was unlike any ship that had ever existed, a fusion of crystal technology and veil dimensional science, powered by gravity cores and crewed by representatives from every allied species. Captain Sarah, daughter of the colony governor who had died defending New Geneva years before, stood on the bridge as the ship prepared for its maiden voyage. She wore her father's medal beside her captain's insignia, carrying forward his promise to protect life wherever it grew. "All stations report ready," her mixed-species crew announced in a dozen different voices. "Take us out," she ordered. The Unity slipped between dimensions like a veil ship. emerged in with the crystalline perfection of engineering, and accelerated beyond the laws of physics using gravity cores that science had spent centuries perfecting. It was impossible, beautiful, and it worked. The first engagement with the Devourers took place at the edge of the Tau system. The enemy appeared as expected, not ships but holes in reality itself, absences that consumed light and matter with equal hunger. Traditional weapons passed through them harmlessly. But the Unity wasn't carrying traditional weapons. "Fire the reality anchor," ordered. The Veil technology locked local spacetime into a stable configuration, preventing the Devourers from simply erasing the matter around them. Suddenly, they became vulnerable to conventional attack. Crystal bombardment, full power. The ancient weapons of the Empire, enhanced by human innovation and engineering, struck the trapped Devourers. For the first time in galactic history, the cosmic predators felt pain. They struck back with forces that warped reality itself, but the Unity's hybrid shielding held. Draconian, genetic enhancements allowed the crew to survive gravitational stresses that would have killed unmodified beings. Healing technologies repaired damage faster than it could accumulate. When the battle ended, 3 Devourers had been destroyed, and the Unity remained intact. The word spread across the galaxy in hours. The ancient enemy could be defeated. The final battle took place at the galactic core, where the Devourers had established their primary feeding ground around the central black hole. By then, the Allied fleet numbered in the thousands, ships that combined the technologies and crew of dozens of species, all united by the simple human principle that those who stand together are stronger than those who stand alone. Admiral commanded the flagship Eternal Harmony, his crystalline form now permanently altered by biotechnological enhancements that allowed him to interface directly with the ship's hybrid systems. Around him, officers from every allied species worked in perfect coordination, their different strengths combining into something greater than any single species could achieve. The battle was brutal beyond description. Reality warped and twisted as the Devourers fought for their cosmic feeding grounds. Ships died by the hundreds, their crews sacrificing themselves to protect others, just as Captain had done years before at Haven's Rest. But for every ship that fell, others took its place. The network of trust and cooperation that humanity had built held firm under the ultimate test. When vessels were overwhelmed, ships moved to shield them. When Veil collective fighters were trapped in dimensional storms, Draconian warriors dove in to rescue them without hesitation. And in the center of it all, Ambassador Maria Santos, now bearing the title of Voice of the Alliance, coordinated the impossible. A battle plan that required perfect trust and cooperation between species that had been strangers or enemies just years before. "All ships, final push," her voice carried across the fleet. "For everyone who has ever stood up for others, for everyone who has ever chosen hope over fear, for everyone who has ever believed that together we are stronger." The Devourers made their last stand around the galactic core, but they faced something they had never encountered in a million years of cosmic predation. A prey species that had learned to hunt as a pack. When the final Devourer fell, consumed by its own impossible hungers turned back upon itself, the galaxy fell silent. Then, slowly, the celebrations began. On Earth, children learned new songs about the Alliance. On Prime, crystal gardens were planted where the monuments to Eternal Empire had once stood. Throughout human space and beyond, memorial gardens grew where every species planted something beautiful from there. Admiral stood in his quarters aboard the Eternal Harmony, looking at a collection that had grown far beyond Ambassador Santos' simple wooden carving. Gifts from 100 worlds filled the space. Crystals that sang with stellar wind, biolights that pulsed with living rhythms, shadow weavings that showed the beauty of thought made visible. A chime announced an incoming message. Ambassador Santos appeared on the screen, her hair gray now but her eyes still bright with that inexhaustible human optimism. "Admiral, I wanted to thank you personally. Without the Empire's support, we never could have defeated the Devourers. Without humanity's vision, Ambassador, we never would have learned to truly cooperate. The Empire owes you a debt that spans the stars." Santos smiled. "There's no debt between friends, Admiral. That's what friendship means." As the transmission ended, reflected on the changes the last 5 years had brought. The Empire still existed, But it was no longer an empire of subjects ruled by fear. It had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a willing member of a true alliance, respected for its contributions rather than feared for its power. The humans had been right about something crucial. Being remembered with love did indeed last longer than being feared across the galaxy. The alliance they had built would endure not because it was enforced by superior weapons, but because every member species chose to belong, chose to contribute, chose to stand beside each other against whatever threats the universe might bring. And in gardens scattered across 10,000 worlds, children of 100 different species played together under alien suns, learning that diversity was strength, and that those who stand beside others are remembered long after empires fall. The galaxy had learned the greatest lesson humanity had to offer, that true immortality isn't found in crystal bodies or eternal empires, but in the love and gratitude of those whose lives you have chosen to protect and nurture. To stand beside humanity was indeed to be remembered, honored beyond the rise and fall of empires, written in the hearts of every species that learned to call them friend.